Hello and welcome to Hamilton the Podcast. I'm Robbie Hurlocker.
And I'm Vinton Bayne.
And we're joined today by a special guest, Rebekah Parker.
Hi there.
We're glad to have you in the studio with us. You actually introduced me to the musical Hamilton.
Yes, I did.
So I would like to publicly thank you in front of all of our listeners very much for introducing me to the joy of Hamilton.
You are welcome. I take full credit.
A byproduct of that was introducing me to Hamilton through Robbie.
Right.
So this is like a pyramid scheme.
It
so
is.
Do I make money?
I don't think so, unfortunately.
Okay.
Sadly. We'll hook you up with Lin-Manuel. He may owe you some commission or something.
Maybe when we
so.
get famous, we'll send you some stickers or something.
I love stickers. That's fine.
That's great.
So, Rebekah, how
Yes.
did you get into Hamilton?
How did I get into Hamilton? Well, the first time I heard about Hamilton was, I believe, last January, when the show was still at the Public Theater.
Okay.
I actually work in music theater. I am a professor at Oklahoma City University.
Wow.
So I stay pretty up to date with a lot of the things that are going on on Broadway and off Broadway and around Broadway.
I know I always appreciate when you can get me tickets to local musicals around here.
I do. I try to
Makes me
get
really
Robbie
helpful.
tickets. I do.
You have
I
a
do.
great inside perspective then.
I do. I really do. And I have a really, really good friend who I grew up with here who is a musician in New York. And her boyfriend, who is a music theater composer, told me about this show. They saw it at the Public before it moved to the Richard Rodgers Theater, where it opened for previews on July 13th. And they told me about it, and I talked to her on the phone, and she said, "You've got to hear about this show. It's about Alexander Hamilton." And I was like, "What do you mean?
Typical
It's about
reaction,
Alexander Hamilton. I don't understand." And she said, "Well, it's Lin-Manuel Miranda." And of course, I'm very familiar with Lin-Manuel Miranda because of his other show that got really popular and won a bunch of Tonys, In the Heights. And I actually got to play in the orchestra pit for that show at the Pollard Theater a couple of years ago.
Oh, that's
Nice.
awesome.
Yeah, and In the Heights is just, it's a great piece of music theater. And it's all about the Latino community in Washington Heights in New York. It's completely hip hop and rap, R&B and pop influenced, very similar to this show. And just, I was a huge fan of it. I grew up listening to a lot of hip hop and R&B music, so I've been a big fan for a long time. And of course, you know, you infuse that with Broadway and you've got me hooked.
Yeah.
So it was just wonderful In the Heights. So when my friend Mira told me this was Lin-Manuel Miranda, I was like, okay, I'm on board. You don't have to convince me.
Sure.
All right. So I ended up traveling to New York over the summer to do some work. I was doing a performance in New York, and we were like, should we try to get tickets to this? So my husband and I began looking, and it was kind of a last minute trip. We found tickets on eBay, of all places. They were very expensive, although still hundreds of dollars cheaper than they are now, I
Yeah,
should say. We
sure.
got in at the right time. So the show opened for previews July 13th. We saw it July 31st, and we got orchestra seats, which was incredible. And I was concerned about the money we were spending, but ultimately it was the right choice. It was, you know, Robbie will be the first to tell you that it takes a lot to impress me or to draw emotion out of me as far as musical performance of any
Right.
kind goes.
You have high standards.
I have high standards. I dislike a lot of things. I can point out the wrong in anything and anyone at any time, anywhere.
And you know what you like.
I know what I like. I know what I like. Perfect for your women episode.
We probably were not trying to make you into
A
a
woman
token
who knows what she
here,
likes.
but
I'm the token woman for the token
No.
woman episode.
Since the beginning of this podcast, I wanted to get you on. I wanted to get you
know.
on for your perspective.
I'm just
here.
kidding, no. But we saw the show, and I don't consider myself a patriotic person. I'm fine with the country. I'd be fine with any of the countries. They're all the same to me. So when I started feeling patriotism toward the end of the first act, when I was sitting there in the Richard Rodgers Theater, I was very confused. What's going on? I feel patriotism. I kind of want to say the Pledge of Allegiance. What's happening? There were tears in my eyes. I look over next to...
That never used to happen before.
That's correct. Excellent reference. My husband and I were both teary-eyed watching George Washington come out, and I was rooting for America. And I've never really been that way. Not because I dislike America. I just don't root for
Right.
teams in general or countries. I just, whatever to me. But I felt like this warm sense of patriotism that I have seen other people feel in my life and never understood. And that was because of the music, seeing Hamilton, just the end of the first act. I was blown away, and it was actually better than I expected, which never happens. You know, when something's really built up and everyone's like, this is going to be the best movie of all time, and then you go see it and you're like, yeah, it was pretty good.
Didn't live up to the hype.
I like to keep really low expectations, but I couldn't do that with this because everyone had been saying Hamilton, Hamilton, Hamilton. So we saw it July 31st. It was wonderful. I was hooked from the moment I saw it and couldn't get it out of my head for a really, really long time.
So if you saw this musical in July, you had another 2 months left before the cast recording was actually released, right?
Correct. The NPR released that streaming link that everyone freaked out about on September 21st, which I think was a Monday. It was like at the beginning of the week.
I listened to it at least 3 or 4 or 5 times during that week itself.
That's when I first heard it. Robbie sent me a link, and I checked it out, and I was busy at the time, so I couldn't really focus on it. And I was like, this is weird. What is this?
Yeah, I had house guests that week, and I remember indoctrinating them with it, just blaring it from my room.
And it was exciting because when I had seen it July 31st, I wanted to tell everyone about it then, but it's really hard to understand until you've heard it and or seen it.
I agree with that, yeah.
And Lin-Manuel Miranda had done a really, really good job keeping any and every bit of this musical off the internet so that people could not hear or see it.
Right.
Well, even when he released the recording, he left the song out so people would have to see it to hear that song.
That's right.
Which is ingenious.
Yes.
Great idea. Even though we're sad when we don't get to see it and then don't know that song.
He pulled a Taylor Swift. So, after you saw the musical, what was your biggest takeaway leaving the theater?
Well, at the very end of the musical, I wouldn't even call it a twist, but as you probably both know, in the staging, Eliza comes all the way downstage and sings the very last song, and we in the musical, and a lot of people I've talked to who have seen it think the same thing. Hamilton, is this about Eliza Hamilton? Or was it about Alexander Hamilton?
Yeah.
Because they shared the same last name, and it kind of puts it all in Eliza's hand. It feels like a twist in a weird way, a twist of what is this actually about? And like, oh, it was about the girl.
Yeah. And if you look at it from a classic story stance, she's the one with a lot of character growth and a lot of changing going on.
Yeah, she starts off with singing about this, like she's star-crossed, hopeless, helpless. She looks at this guy and she's just head over heels about it. And then she grows into this really strong, confident woman who is absolutely her own woman and is taking care of things. She's getting stuff done. And then when the entire musical is over, it's on her shoulders to make sure that the Hamilton legacy is continued.
Yeah, which would make it impossible to make a musical about her without it being about him, because that's what she would want to tell you about.
Right. She's just this fantastic woman.
We don't have a lot of documentation surrounding the lives of women the further back you move in history.
That's actually a really interesting point. You're 100% correct. I'm reading a book right now by Cokie Roberts that's entitled The Founding Mothers, The Women Who Raised Our Nation. And I think you would love this book. It is so good. Cokie Roberts is fantastic at writing it. She covers the lesser-known women like Deborah Sampson, who totally pulled a Mulan and dressed up like a man to fight beside her brothers in the army. Covers the more well-known women like Abigail Adams, who was keeping her husband's law practice afloat, managed the farm, fended off British soldiers on her property, coped with the food shortage. I have to tell this short story. I know that this is a Hamilton podcast, but Abigail Adams got a letter from her son, John Quincy Adams, and this kid was complaining about how there's no women my age who are as brilliant as the women of your generation, Mom, who are absolutely ingenuitive, who knew what to do with their lives, and then she just shoots right back to her son and says, well, if men didn't expect women to act so frivolous and flighty, then maybe she would get something different out of him. Like, they would get something different. She was hardcore about shutting up the misogyny and making sure women were educated at that period of time.
Work, Abigail.
Work it. And so we get introduced into the Schuyler Sisters specifically because they are among that exact vein in this musical. They tell us that they want to be independent women. They're looking for minds at work. They're not just willing to lay down and just be in the background of history. They are a part of this musical.
An important part. an
Yes.
important part.
Absolutely
important
critical.
part.
So let's dive into the text of this particular song and start talking through the Schuyler Sisters itself.
So, the Schuyler Sisters is our first introduction in the show to the three Schuyler sisters, Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy. And right before this, the story of tonight and those other songs that we've already talked about on the podcast, I believe, we are introduced to all of the leading gentlemen of the show. So basically, to set up this scene, we have Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy, and they are traipsing the streets of New York, having a great girl sister time, talking about how excited they are and scared they are, too, about the revolution and what's happening. And Angelica, the oldest sister, is talking about she's looking for a man that can match her wit and her intelligence and someone that she feels is an equal to her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the song is about.
Yeah. So I like that they say, Peggy specifically starts it out, Daddy said to be home by sundown, and Angelica says, Daddy doesn't need to know, which I think brings up a point that you brought up earlier, which is that these girls were pretty independent and they weren't willing to fit into the mold that the time gave to women, that they wanted to be more than that. And you see that pop up over and over again in the musical. That right there is like the first instance of that. Daddy doesn't need to know. We're going to do our own thing here.
Yeah, Peggy's afraid, or her lyrics indicate that she might be afraid to break the rules. Daddy said to be home by sundown. It's bad enough. Daddy wants to go to war. He said not to go downtown.
Right,
And Angelica's just shutting her down. Daddy doesn't need to know. And Eliza says, like I said, you are free to go. So they're already at the point in their lives when they are breaking the rules a little bit and maybe being a little bit rebellious. And they're kind of showing Peggy, like, well, here's what we're doing. And she'll probably pick up on that and follow her sister's example.
And it's worth noting that Philip Schuyler probably had good reasons to not want his daughters out alone in the middle of British-occupied New York City at this point in time. It was a pretty dangerous place.
So you also get an introduction to the three girls and kind of their ideas on what's going on. So Eliza says people shouting in the square, and you see this excitement of everything going on, that she's excited about this passion, this fervor that's being built up. Peggy says it's bad enough there'll be violence on our shore. She's got this fear of the war and everything that's going on, the violence that could be happening. And Angelica says new ideas in the air, and you can see that she's excited about the intellectual state of everything going on.
Which is actually a really interesting thing. Angelica engages with Hamilton and his letters on a really political level. She's able to discuss the politics of everything that's happening at the time. She also holds correspondence with Thomas Jefferson whenever they spend time together in France and then correspond from London as well. Angelica Schuyler is engaged with a lot of the big thinkers of this time, which you see in the fact that she talks about how she has read Common Sense by Thomas Paine, released in 1776, this pamphlet that inspired a lot of the revolutionary conflicts.
And I think that if we start getting into revolutionary conflict, she says something about not wanting a revolution, but a revelation. And I think the revolution to her is maybe more personal. I mean, there's literally the revolution, the American Revolution that we all know and love. No. But,
well, we wouldn't be here without it.
That's true, perhaps, or we'd have different accents or something. Who knows? But there's also the idea when you are a woman living in a society that doesn't value what you think, you have your own ideas of what you want, of what kind of revolution you want. And I feel like for Angelica, that's really the crux of who she is.
On that note, what do you see as Angelica's goal here? What do you say she actually wants in life right now?
Angelica wants someone who values her and who values what it is she has to say. Someone who's going to listen to her ideas and give her the same respect that she might give them.
Which is not exactly what she gets in Aaron Burr, who steps up to her and introduces himself.
Correct. He's trying to woo her like he's wooed 1,000 girls in the past, and that kind of funny business does not work on Angelica.
Excuse me, miss, I know it's not funny, but your perfume smells like your daddy's got money. Why you slumming in the city in your fancy heels? You searching for an urchin who can give you ideals?
She does not need an urchin who can give her ideals.
She has ideals of her own.
That's correct.
I love the rhyme that comes after that, where Angelica just looks at him with attitude and says, "Burr, you disgust me." And then he responds quickly with, "Ah, so you disgust me."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's kind of sleazebag.
Even bad publicity is good publicity. Is
Oh,
that what,
no.
is that what he's going for there?
It's one of those, is if I say no, does that actually mean yes? If she says, I don't think so, does that mean a resounding yes? She says no, and he refuses to take that. He's going to
And all
continue.
the guys.
Even that next line is kind of interesting because he says, "I'm a trust fund, baby, you can trust me." So it's kind of that connected to both parts. It's just an interesting way to write that line.
And he was at that point living off his trust fund for his papa, who was a president of Princeton College. Like, he had this trust fund taking him through school and stuff.
I love that. That's one of my favorite little sections in the whole show. And that right there is a Lin-Manuel special melding together, because you have the phrase trust fund baby, which is someone who was born with money from their parents. And and the way that he has it here, of course, is I'm a trust fund baby, because he's saying,
baby.
I don't know, how do men say baby to, men don't say that to me, but if they did, that's the idea. Burr says it.
They never say it twice. At least.
That's right. They never say it twice. You are absolutely correct. But yeah, he's trying to flirt with her, and it doesn't charm anyone but the audience.
So then Angelica kind of shuts him down by basically explaining who she is and what she knows. She mentions she's been reading Common Sense by Thomas Paine, that a lot of men, because of her education and her beliefs, say that she's intense or she's insane.
Which has been pointed out on a lot of social media sites before, that there are two people in this musical that are called insane. But when it's addressed to Hamilton, they're like, "This kid is insane, man," and it's a compliment.
Yeah, it's a positive.
And then when Angelica is called insane, it's like an insult specifically, which is worth commenting on, and probably a conversation for another point. But
Well, when women speak their mind and have opinions, a lot of people don't like that.
yeah,
People prefer, still, I would argue, many people are not used to women who know exactly what they want and don't like it when they speak out, and that's very uncomfortable.
Well, even in the musical, how did they respond when Hamilton's had opinions and spoke his mind? Let's get this guy in front of a crowd. And then she has opinions and speaks her mind, and she's either intense or insane.
Yes, I think we should be getting Angelica in front of a crowd more often.
oh yeah. Then the women on stage start singing, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," and Angelica finishes a line, "And when I meet Thomas Jefferson, I'ma compel him to include women in the sequel," which
Work.
it's kind of a low-key reference. I don't know if it's intended to be that way or not, but it's kind of a low-key reference to the Declaration of Sentiments in 1848, where 68 women and 32 men sat down in Seneca Falls, New York, and wrote these particular rights about men and women. They say, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights." And they basically go through and paraphrase the Declaration of Independence, but with that gender equality perspective.
So did you all learn about the Declaration of Sentiments in school?
I did not.
I'd never heard of it.
Nor did I. Thanks, Edmond Public Schools. Very interesting. So another cool thing about this song, first of all, it's written in the style of a Destiny's Child song or any other female hip-hop group, which I am completely sold on. I'm a huge fan of Destiny's Child.
I would love to see Beyonce play the role of Angelica.
I would also like to see that. I think that would be really, really great.
Apparently, in an interview, she was a big fan of The King's Walk and said that
Oh,
she was going to use it
yeah.
in her live
That's correct.
performances.
I could definitely see Angelica stepping on stage in front of big flashing lights that say feminist in the background. That would be kind
Absolutely.
of cool.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I love the use of the word work in this song. We talk about looking for a mind at work. So that's the literal definition. We're looking for someone who's thinking, a mind at work, someone who's trying to see things in more than one way. But we also use the word work in this song in the colloquial way that some might use today in a modern sense, which I find to be spelled WERK on the internet. Do you guys agree?
Yeah,
Work it.
You've seen WERK. WERK is I see it a lot with music in the music theater community. It is a compliment to say work to somebody if they're wearing a great outfit, or if they are fierce, or if they have done something really great. And they use the word interchangeably throughout this song, and I think that's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
It's a very feminist song, I think, and I love that.
Yeah, there's a lot of empowerment there, and it's really nice to see.
And there's a lot of love for New York, which I think is another brilliant way to get your audience, which is mostly going to be New Yorkers or people who love New York, to be right there with you. So when they sing history is happening in Manhattan, and we just happen to be in the greatest city in the world, and of course we repeated the greatest city in the world. It's so wonderful and exciting.
Are you accusing Lin-Manuel of pandering to his audience
Absolutely, and I love it, and I'm totally cool with it. He is absolutely pandering, but I know he believes it too, because I know that he loves New York City, so it's just a reflection of his own beliefs as well.
It is.
But I think that's wonderful.
And that's one of the strengths of this musical, is that it is a New York story. It's an American story. It's really interesting because we're so far divorced from war in our own generation. The war is something that happens overseas. It's something that happens far away from us. But when you hear about the Battle of Yorktown and Monmouth and some of these areas that actually they're talking about, we've got to get to Harlem quick. And
Kips Bay.
Yeah, these are areas that people who are seeing the musical have probably been at those exact locations where this exact battle was being fought.
I love that. It makes you feel so connected to it, even though it does feel like a long time ago now.
Historically, Aaron Burr actually has the reputation of being a pretty strong feminist in his writings. He was a single father to a daughter, that he wanted to fight for her education and her rights to own things and be able to grow up, and he was very sex positive for men and women. But in the text of this musical, he does have some of the most sexist lines in general. We're going to jump to A Winter's Ball right now as we continue this dialogue, where Aaron Burr is going to be just introducing this scene in particular, saying, how does a bastard orphan, son of a whore, go on and grow into more of a phenomenon? Watch this obnoxious, arrogant, loudmouthed bother be seated at the right hand of the father. In next week's episode, we'll tackle Hamilton's actual climb to becoming George Washington's right-hand man. But here we get to see that Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton have one thing in common, and it's their love for the ladies.
Yay.
There are so many to deflower.
Wonderful.
I have a question here. When you hear Aaron Burr at the beginning shout out looks, proximity to power, I want to ask, because I could see this going two separate ways, and it may be that Lin-Manuel means it as double entendre, but do you think he's specifically saying, this is what I have to offer, ladies, like I have looks, proximity to power, or is he saying specifically, this is what I'm looking for in a woman? I want good looks, and I want someone who's going to help me advance and be positioned closer to power myself.
I feel like it could be either, but I'm going to go with what he wants.
Yeah.
And if we look at Burr's lines without the lines in between them, he says, as you so beautifully orated for us a moment ago, there are so many to deflower: looks, proximity to power. I feel like that's what he's looking for. He wants an attractive woman who can help him reach his goals, because as we know, Burr is a Slytherin for life.
He is.
And he is ambitious and will do whatever he can to further what he needs and wants. Which, if he can get one of the Schuyler sisters, then he has, a line in.
Right, because we didn't talk about Philip Schuyler very much when we were discussing the last song, but Major General Philip Schuyler had a lot of power. He was one of the three major factions in New York politics at the times. You had the Clintons, you had the Livingstons, and you had the Schuylers, and they were one of the three powerhouses.
Right, so you could say that the Schuyler sisters were the looks and proximity to the power.
Correct. I love that.
Then you have this line about the Tomcat. So I read a number of biographies about Alexander Hamilton, and all of them have this story in it about Martha Washington having this this wild cat that is running around. She decides to name her tomcat Hamilton, because Hamilton was also a tomcat who had an eye for all the ladies and in general. I think it's a really interesting story. Lots of historians around Chernow thinks it's credible. I read another biography recently that said it probably originated with British propaganda against the Washington family, so I don't know whether it's actually factual or not. I like to think that it is, though. Lin-Manuel obviously thinks it is because he steps in and says, that's true.
Someone on Twitter contacted Lin-Manuel Miranda with an article about how it may not be true.
Oh,
to
yeah?
which he responded, but I like Hamilton bragging about it, so there.
Okay, so he knows him. That's awesome. I did not know that. So the setting is this winter's ball. The army is in winter's quarters in Morristown. The soldiers don't usually have a lot to live for, but they actually have a lot of fun happening on this particular night. The ball is together. There are a lot of women in the area, and this is actually the scene where the Schuyler Sisters come into the camp. If you read the Chernow biography or any other biography that will talk to you about how Alexander Hamilton met Eliza Hamilton, it'll talk about this particular dance where they're coming together in Morristown and they spend a few days here, and you see that Aaron Burr introduces the Schuyler Sisters as they're walking in, and he says, the Schuyler Sisters are the envy of all. If you could marry a sister, you're rich, son. And I love Hamilton's response to it. He's just a cocky, arrogant little guy.
Is it a question of if, Burr? Or which one?
Yeah. And then they go into their flirting with their typical suave guy flirting with, hey, how you doing?
It's truly one of the funniest moments in the show.
Yeah.
When they go into the haze of Helpless. I find it very hilarious and enjoyable every time.
And we've already discussed that's not going to work with these ladies.
Maybe. It might work with Eliza.
Okay, we'll see how well it happens. You're right, actually.
We could only be in the room where it happens.
True. Great reference.
So what we're going to see is we're going to see this particular scene from Eliza's point of view. We're going to see them her interacting with Hamilton, and then we're going to see the same scene again in a little while from Angelica's point of view.
Truly one of the most brilliant stagings of all time.
I love it to death. When they do that rewind scene and they reverse that choreography to show that, I'm like,
absolutely wonderful.
It's so good.
This song is from Eliza's point of view, and we get to know her a little bit better here. And she uses this word kind of to describe herself, helpless. And it's not what you would expect if you know her.
Yeah, our friend Liz Stevens at the Odd Man Out podcast with Common Run Radio, she pointed out that this was a real disappointment to her, this song in general, because she was introduced to these sisters who were really empowered, who were feminist by every definition of the word. They were independent women rebelling against authority. They were doing their thing in the streets of New York City. And then you see that Eliza starts explaining her goals and her motivation, and she's a lovesick puppy who is absolutely helpless. And she was super let down by that.
Yeah, there's almost a little bit of a comedy to it because you see this really strong woman, and Hamilton just steps in and goes, hey. And then she goes, helpless. And it's just like, oh, she's in love.
So I suppose this poses a question that I think is really important. Can you be a strong, able, feminist woman and also be in love with a man in a way that makes you fall head over heels and have butterflies and all of the things that come with romance? I think you can.
Absolutely. And that's something I love about this, because it doesn't paint women as one role that they can fill. It's not saying that you have to be this political powerhouse in order to be a woman of value. You can be a woman who wants to become a good wife and raise her family well, and you can be a homebody and be an absolutely amazing feminist woman.
And I like that she loves Alexander. She has made the choice. She likes who he is. I am thinking of different musicals where we have a female who basically the story is by the end of the show, she has finally fallen for the man. She's given in to what he wanted, but the whole show she is rebuffing him at in every possible way.
Like,
But
I'm thinking of Professor Harold Hill in The Music Man, where he does not get that no means no.
Yeah, there's a lot of shows like that. But here she likes Alexander. She loves him. And she wants to be with him. And of course, we see something here that we don't often see in musicals or movies or stories. we see the middles and maybe even the ends of relationships. So a lot of what we see in a story is the falling in love process that ends in marriage or ends in we're going to be dating now or whatever. But here we get to see them meet, fall in love, get married, have children, have marital struggles, have infidelity, and how are we going to deal with this? How do we move forward from this? And that's something we don't see a lot. And I think that is really, really interesting for women because we get to see not only how does everything that Alexander Hamilton do affect Eliza and her sisters and their family, but how does her love for him affect everything around him as well? We're seeing how both sides of this union affect everyone around them. And I think that's really important because I think history books leave out a lot of things that are really important. These women who were in charge of so many things and really affected what was going on with the men and how they conducted their business.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, Rebekah, what can you tell us about the different musical influences within this particular song?
Well, this song is a huge tribute to the one and only Beyonce. It is completely and totally in the style of Beyonce. There are certain moments that feel like they're straight out of a Beyonce song, like in the living room, stressin', all of those lines, blessin', all of those. Wine, dying inside as you wine and dine. A lot of these rhythms and melodic lines are very similar to some Beyonce songs. We also have, I believe it's in the song, the boy is mine line.
Yes.
Which is, of course, a reference to the amazing song by R&B singer Brandy, which I believe was 1998.
I haven't heard of Brandy in a long time. She's
The
so
Boy
good.
Is Mine is the name of her
neither,
song,
yeah. I
and
remember
that's
that song.
yeah. And that's definitely a tribute to her.
That's great.
But I love that. I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, ah. And you know, of course, when I'm hearing this live in the theater, I'm thinking to myself, oh, ha ha ha, funny little reference. But then I think, oh, I just thought of that because I'm myself. But then later, of course, once the album is released and people like you have ripped it to shreds, just trying to figure out every single thing about it. And of course, Lynn himself has gone online and told people, here's what this is, here's what this references.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh no, that was for sure, like a purposeful Easter egg. And that almost made me love it more.
It's kind of crazy how much of that there is in the musical. He puts so
Right.
many references into it. I think I called it a masterfully crafted puzzle when we first started talking about it. And it really is. He puts so much into this that you just wouldn't
Yeah.
pick up until you've listened to it like 30 times and you get into his mind a little bit and you hear the things he said about it. And every time I hear something, I'm like, that too? That too?
Yeah.
How much did you put into this? Every word, like no word is thrown away in this musical.
And that it making something like American history be so culturally relevant, that's really a gift, I think. And and of course, anytime we consume art of any kind, we are also looking at who were they influenced by, which composers.
Yeah.
You know, we're an influence on these people, and we have, you know, we have a Gilbert and Sullivan reference in this musical. We have
Jason Robert Brown
Jason
reference.
Robert Brown, a direct quote, almost direct quote from a Jason Robert Brown show. And I love that. We have a lot of little hints to Stephen Sondheim and other
Right.
great composers and lyricists. And of course, it's the same thing when you're looking at, you know, visual art or at, you know, poetry or writing. So last summer, I visited this Beat Museum that had all sorts of interesting artifacts related to the Beat generation. And this was in San Francisco. And there was a display on the wall that showed the bookshelves of Jack Kerouac, William S. Burroughs, and Allen Ginsberg.
That's neat.
Yeah, and it showed what they were reading or what are the things they were interested in and what was on their bookshelves. And you look at that and it was all very diverse. I mean, you had Shakespeare, you had all sorts of things on there that you wouldn't know that maybe unless you would really study the works deeply. But I think as an artist myself and other artists I know, I think it's really, really interesting to study, okay, where did this come from? What was your influence? And why are you who you are as a musician or a writer or a composer or a painter? And we see that in Lin-Manuel's work all over the place. And I think that brings a great joy for those of us who appreciate that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's very overt because he puts things like this, lyrics like "The Boy Is Mine." He puts that right in there.
Yeah.
So anybody who's familiar with Brandy or that song, or was jamming in 1998, is going to be like, "Oh my gosh!" It's just another way to get your audience to connect to you, and I think that's very cool. I love that.
Yeah, I know for me, I love DVD commentaries because I like to know, why did you come up with this? Why did you
Me
do this
too.
a certain way and things like that. And it's really interesting. You can't really get that with a live musical. I mean, I guess if they put it on DVD, they might do something like that. But Lin-Manuel, instead of that, is online all the time just talking about it. He's like, oh, you want to know? I'll tell you all about why I wrote that and why I put that in the musical. And that's really cool that he does that and he's so active
Yeah, I love
in
that.
sharing.
I don't feel like very many people could have made this musical besides him, because he has the music theater background, the music theater passion, and the passion for Tupac and Big Pun and R&B and gospel and all of those things meshed together to make this beautiful piece of art.
Right.
And he wants it to be accessible for the younger generation. He wants people to be able to interact and discuss and learn and experience. And right now, a lot of that is happening online for younger people. And so it's a very new thing and a wonderful thing. And I'm sure you guys will talk about, I'm sure you know, his program that he has done with the public schools in New York, where he's having young kids come to the show on Wednesdays.
I had heard a little bit of something about that, yeah.
Because, that was one of the complaints. Well, okay, this is great that we are, we have a show that is representing minorities in a way that we have never done before. It's so wonderful. It's so new and different and reflects a more diverse America. But we still have, extremely rich white folks that are buying all the tickets because a lot of minorities can't afford to come to the show. And so he's been trying to make it more accessible to people by doing the Ham for Ham lottery and by having these kids come from public schools on Wednesdays to see the show. It's just wonderful. Another thing I love about this song is just a little bit of foreshadowing with the I do, which of course is an I do for a wedding.
Setting
I
us
love
up for
that.
it.
Setting us up for the wedding. I think that's so cute. I love it. I think it's wonderful. It's smart. And then I wanted to ask you guys what you thought about "In New York, You Can Be a New Man." At the end of the song, we have, I think it's just the women singing, "In New York, you can be a new man." And they have this lovely harmony at the end there. And I think it's interesting we have women singing, "In New York, you can be a new man." And then Eliza ends with "Helpless."
Yeah, that is a little bit interesting. I'm not sure what all to make of that or whether we're supposed to make much of it. I do think it's interesting when Hamilton has this bit of vulnerability in his confession to Eliza. I don't have a dollar to my name, an acre of land, a troop to command, a dollop of fame. All I have is my honor, a tolerance for pain, a couple of college credits, and my top-notch brain. Insane, your family brings out a different side of me. Peggy confides in me, goes into this whole thing, and he gets really vulnerable when he starts talking about his mother again and where he came from. He says, I've been living without a family since I was a child, and your family's becoming my new family, but remember, my father left, my mother died, I grew up buck wild. And then he looks at her and he's like, but I will never forget my mother's face. That was real. As long as I'm alive, Eliza, I swear to God, you'll never feel so helpless. It's like he has seen what it's like to have his mother in an absolutely desperate situation, completely helpless, and he is going to do everything in his power now to make sure that he works with Eliza as his partner to make sure she doesn't feel that desperate, helpless situation, that he is looking to her, pledging his love to make this relationship work.
Yeah, I love that. The idea that any man could learn from his mother how to treat a woman.
Yeah.
So the question is this an empty promise on his part? Do you think he meant it? Maybe he thought he was going to be the perfect husband, but maybe a lot of us think we're going to be the perfect spouse, and things happen.
I think early on in his life, he definitely had very romantic ideas of what marriage was. And when you see his ideas about what he wanted in a wife and what he wanted out of a marriage, he did have every expectation that he would be a loyal, faithful husband, a very faithful religious husband in general. There's a quote that I think is worth reading, if I can find it really quickly, where he's writing a letter to his friend John Lawrence, and he's talking about what he wants in a wife. And he writes, this is a little off topic, but it's worth reading. He's talking about what he expects his future spouse to be. He says, she must be young, handsome. I lay most stress on a good shape. Sensible, a little learning will do. Well-bred, but she must have an aversion to the word ton. Chaste and tender, I'm an enthusiast in my notions of fidelity and fondness. Of some good nature, a great deal of generosity. She must love neither money nor scolding, for I dislike equally a termagant and an economist. And I like this arrogant piece in here. In politics, I'm indifferent what side she may be of. I think I have arguments that will easily convert her to mine. As to religion, a moderate streak will satisfy me. She must believe in God and hate a saint. So he has this really fun little flippant conversation with her there. So there's definitely this arrogant, like, I can definitely make something out of it, but he definitely is wanting something that's going to last.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he's looking forward to having his own family. That's so important to him, his legacy. What's he going to make of his situation, of his life, of his wreckage, that he has come from?
And it might not lessen any of that, but he did always have his politics in mind and where he was going as a person. Mm-hmm. So he was trying to further himself. And I think that's kind of what that line in New York, you can be a new man, that almost like the sisters are telling him, hey, if you come be one of us, you'll go up in social class. You'll be a new man in New York.
It's a seduction.
Yeah.
It's a seduction. It's a come hither.
Yeah, the next line in that exact same letter, he says, but as to fortune, the larger stock of that, the better. Because he understands that he needs to be married into something specifically. Angelica will comment on that in her next song when we revisit this exact scene, because we'll see that Hamilton is very aware that he needs the Schuyler family. He needs to marry into this well-off, powerful, rich family, or else he's going nowhere.
Exactly.
So we've just been charmed by this fresh love story between Eliza and Alexander Hamilton, and very quickly we get into Satisfied. They rewind the scene, so to speak, and we see the entire scene we just watched play out again with a different song and a different star. So we now see what was going on with Angelica at the exact same time, the same night, at the same winter's ball in Morristown.
On that rewind, the choreography, they actually go backwards for a little bit, don't they?
Yeah.
They reset the stage.
Yeah, it's very cool.
It's a great idea.
It's really, really visually striking. It's one of those, you've got to see it. It's great to listen, but you've got to see it if you can. So when we start the song, we find out that we're at the wedding now, I suppose. We're not at the winter's ball. We're
She's
at the
making
wedding.
a toast. She's the maid of honor specifically. She says, a toast to the groom, to the bride, from your sister, who's always by your side, to your union and the hope that you provide. May you always be satisfied. And that one word sets her along this thought process where you see the whole stage start to revolve around her, and she is suddenly lost in thought and transported back to that night we were talking about.
And thus we have conflict. We've already got the conflict of the war, but now we have this horrible love triangle, perfect personal conflict. And we quickly see that Angelica is completely in love with Alexander Hamilton, who is now married to her sister, whom she loves more than anyone in the world. It's very, very complicated and sad. And so we hear from Angelica how Alexander makes her feel and how they have a wonderful banter between them and have a great time talking about politics.
Yeah.
And she's conflicted because she knows that he is for her sister and she cannot have him.
Which is just a heartbreaking moment for her when you see that she is actually sacrificing here. It's worth commenting from a historical point of view that this is another area where Lin-Manuel Miranda has decided to play with the timeline a little bit, because by this point in history, Angelica was already married. Angelica married John Church before she even met Alexander Hamilton specifically. So in the letters and the correspondence they have, there's a lot of flirtation, there's a lot of hints at a menage a trois concept in general, but there's specifically, she had already been married before actually meeting him. The timeline is shifted here to make it a little more acceptable for the musical and just to play up this drama a little bit more.
It's even shifted a little more because there actually were some brothers, even though in the musical she mentions that she's the only one.
Yeah, she says, my father has no sons, so I'm the one who has to social climb for one. She had brothers. There were Schuyler brothers. One of them actually became a pretty prominent politician in New York history, but it does heighten that conflict, heightens that drama to say that there's this tension where she has to actually advance herself and tie herself to a man who will continue their family's legacy and family's power. And so there's this it's almost like a fake stress. I don't know exactly why Lin-Manuel decided to change this historical fact. I know, like, it makes sense to omit them from the story because there are so many characters in this cast already, but to actively say that they don't exist is a little bit peculiar and strange. But it does heighten the tension in this drama.
So I actually read a note about this from Lin-Manuel, and it's that he specifically says, I actually forgot that Philip had up to possibly 15 children.
Oh, wow.
But I think that my brain wanted me to forget because it's stronger dramatically.
Yeah, that's right. It's so good. So that night, Eliza had grabbed her sister Angelica, said that guy is mine, that boy is mine, and she goes over, they match wits, and it's a perfect chemistry. It's like Ben Franklin with the key and the kite. You see it, right? They just work perfectly. Everything is the way it's supposed to be between them. She looks back and sees that her sister is helpless, is starry-eyed, lovesick, and she realizes for 3 reasons that she cannot pursue this young soldier boy.
Number 1.
I'm a girl in which my only job is to marry rich. So here we are talking about what we were talking about a second ago, where she sees that she has to socially advance in New York City. She has to play the politics of getting into the social circles, and that's the biggest reason, because Alexander is penniless. But that doesn't make her want him any less.
I actually like that at that point they say number 2, and then he gets introduced to Eliza, and she says, my sister. And so it's like, oh, number 2, here's the second sister.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the second reason she can't pursue him?
The second reason is
Status.
Mm-hmm. And she says she'd have to be naive to be at his side. Maybe that's why she introduces him to Eliza. So the second reason is she introduces him to Eliza almost even. The second reason is Eliza. That's why it says number 2, and here's my sister.
Mm-hmm.
So like the first reason was specifically that I need to climb and socially advance. The second reason is he needs to socially advance. He's after me because I'm a Schuyler sister. He needs to elevate his status up. Maybe that's why I introduced him to Eliza, because he needs to grow, and so Eliza will do this for him specifically, but I need to do it for myself as well,
Yes.
And so they're both on similar paths in that.
And then, of course, reason number 3 is that if she were honest with her sister and told her how she felt, Eliza would probably give Alexander up because that's who Eliza is. And Angelica could not bear that for Eliza.
Yep,
So she's got to keep it to herself, because if she tells her truth, she knows that Eliza would be so selfless as to give up the man that she loves. And Angelica would never truly be happy then, because Eliza's happiness is more important to her.
I love that.
Sisterhood.
I love that between sisters right there. That's awesome.
Loyalty. Mm-hmm.
Which is something that Chernow even brings up in the biography, that they had that relationship of, they could even like both flirt with Hamilton. They'd be fine with it. Just built their sisterhood even more. They were like, yeah, we're strong. This doesn't bother us at all.
Yeah, they bond on Hamilton. Then they bond against him in the second act of this musical when Angelica arrives. And she specifically says, I'm not here for you, Alexander.
Right.
I'm here for my sister, because, and she repeats this exact line again, I know my sister like I know my own mind. And he is absolutely floored by that.
Yeah.
So we've wrapped up this particular replay of the scene. One thing we skipped over earlier was when Eliza was sweating as Alexander Hamilton was sitting there waiting for permission, asking for permission for her father to give the blessing to their relationship. And Philip Schuyler was sitting there across from Alexander, and you don't know exactly whether he's going to approve or not. Eventually he does approve, and the marriage goes forward. It's worth commenting historically that every single one of the Schuyler sisters actually eloped, and only one of them had a wedding. Only one of them actually got married, and that was Eliza. We see this wedding here. That actually made it more stressful for Hamilton in this scene, because he knows that Philip Schuyler historically had just disapproved of Angelica marrying this John Church guy. He had not approved of them getting together. So now, second daughter, Hamilton has to face the Major General specifically and say, I want your permission to marry your other daughter here. And so there's some stress, some tension, but everything works out in the end. You see this wedding coming to play, and we've gone through this scene a second time, and we're now back to the toasts, raising a toast to the groom, to the bride, from your sister, who's always by your side, which means so much more now because we've seen what she's sacrificing. Singing, lifting a toast to the Union, and all the guys are in the back getting drunk. To the Union, to the Revolution, and the hope that you provide. May you always be satisfied.
But
he will never be satisfied, and I will never be satisfied.
This is arguably one of the strongest scenes and songs in the entire show that, we see Renee Elise Goldsberry, our original Angelica, just shine like an unbelievable star in this scene. Vocally, as an actress, she makes you feel things.
Yes.
And this
all
particular song, all the feels, truly all the feels. This particular song really, really, really sticks with people. When I talk to people who have listened to the album for the first time, Satisfied almost always comes up. And I'm speaking particularly about women. I can think of at least 3 women I know who say, oh, Satisfied, that was my favorite, Satisfied. And I don't know if it's because the sisterhood resounds so strongly with women, or it's probably a combination of the story and Renee Elise Goldsberry's performance. But it is truly one of the most stunning songs.
And we will revisit that motif of satisfaction again throughout this entire musical because it comes up in all of these different contexts, and this is the place where you actually set the stage for all of that.
So I'd just like to thank our guest, Rebekah, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much.
This has
thank
been
you
great.
for having me. This was so much fun. I could talk about Hamilton for a long time.
Oh, I know, and we have talked about Hamilton for a long time. I look forward to doing it some more.
Yes.
Hope we can have you more frequently on the show in the future.
Thank you.
Definitely. We'd love it if you joined in with us on the conversation on Twitter. Feel free to tweet at us, and
tell us your favorite Sisters moment.
I'm Vinton at Flesh Eater.
I'm Robbie Hurlocker at Alpha Knight.
This has been a Graphomania production. If you would like to hear more podcasts, go to graphocast.com, graphocast.com. Follow us on Twitter at Graphocast and like the Graphomania page on Facebook for news and updates.